Namaskar viewers, hello and welcome to Sansad TV. I'm Tina Jha, you're watching Perspective. On the show today, we will talk about the India-Australia relationship. Earlier this week, Prime Minister Narendra Modi and his Australian counterpart Scott Morrison held a virtual summit, the second one since June 2020, when the relationship between both countries was elevated to a comprehensive strategic partnership. Both leaders welcomed the substantial progress in deepening political, economic, security, cyber, technology and defense cooperation, and also laid the roadmap on new initiatives to enhance cooperation in a diverse range of sectors. The Australian side announced investments of about 1,500 crore rupees to further boost economic relationship. The two strategic partners also decided to set up a young defense officer exchange program to boost military cooperation, to be named after India's first Chief of Defence Staff, General Bipin Rawat, who passed away in a tragic helicopter crash last year. And most importantly, the two leaders also agreed that to unlock the untapped potential in bilateral trade and investment, there is need to conclude the proposed Comprehensive Economic Cooperation Agreement, the CECA, at the earliest. So what is delaying this agreement? What are the areas in which India and Australia have firmed up initiatives to enhance their cooperation? How have India-Australia relations evolved over the years? These are some of the aspects on which we will get perspectives from distinguished panelists who are joining us on the program. So let me first welcome them on the program. In fact, I'm pleased to welcome on this edition of Perspective on Sansad TV, former Ambassador Mr. Vishnu Prakash, Professor Amitabh Mattu, Director, Australia-India Institute, and Dr. Sriram Cholia, Foreign Affairs Expert. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us on this program on Sansad TV. Ambassador, allow me to begin the program today with you. In fact, if I could begin by asking you, what according to you has been the most significant outcome of this second India-Australia virtual summit?
Greetings and good to be on the program with you. You know, the transformation of the relationship between India and Australia is amazing. I go back to 98 when India went nuclear, and Australia was among the handful of countries which led the charge against India, and at that time they withheld assistance of $2.4 million. Look at the way the relationship has grown, a comprehensive strategic partnership, and one of the things that has been agreed to during the virtual summit is an annual summit between the two countries. The sweep of the relationship, from education to science and technology to critical materials to water resources to supply chain resilience, defense, what have you, it was unimaginable. And the fact that we are Quad partners, the fact that Australia is showing appreciative understanding of India's concerns, and the personal role that Prime Minister Scott Morrison is playing, the way he has led his country, the way he has stood up to aggression from our northern neighbor, shows the kind of determination that Australia brings, the edge that Australia brings to geopolitics. And I think it is in common interest that this relationship grows further. I have no doubt that given the convergence of interest, we will see this relationship gain in salience in the years to come.
Certainly. So how has this relationship evolved over the years is something that I'll come back and understand from Professor Mattu. But before that, a quick question, Dr. Cholia, to you to understand the newer areas of cooperation that we have formed up in this particular virtual summit that was held on the 21st between Prime Minister Modi and his Australian counterpart.
Well, Tina, the first thing, one of the new areas is the critical minerals sector. This is where, Australia is very well endowed. China controls about 50% of the more of the world's rare earths, which go into manufacturing all sorts of things. So critical minerals is one area where we are establishing a solid partnership with Australia, which will enable our Make in India initiatives and also diversify our supply chain and make them more resilient and avoid the monopoly of the Chinese control over major inputs for industrialization. The other thing is also critical and emerging technologies. They talked about tech with democratic values and human rights. This is mentioned in the joint statement, and both the sides have spoken about how we can cooperate on technology. Bengaluru is emerging as a major hub for Australian presence. They have opened a new consulate there, and they want to engage more with Indian entrepreneurs in the high-tech sector. There's a cyber security angle to that also, where they are now increasingly cooperating. So these are some of the emerging areas. I will also mention one, the defense side is also one way emerging, because Australia has changed its approach. Australia has now become a major spender on defense. It was somewhat of a middle player in this field, but now Scott Morrison government actually committed to $200 billion of military spending this decade. That's a significant increase, an enhancement. They're also talking about a 30% increase in the size of the Australian military. They're also hosting more US bases. We have a military logistics agreement, MLSA agreement with the Australians for interoperability of the navies. That is now being enhanced. So on all these counts, the Australians have clearly realized that geopolitically and geostrategically and even economically, India is much more important to them now. For counterbalancing China, definitely. Also for creating this, what we call free and open Indo-Pacific. So on all these counts, I think the convergence is growing, and that's where there's so much momentum.
Professor Mattu, this upgradation in ties that Dr. Cholia has mentioned was something that was amiss over several decades. India and Australia had mutual indifferences for several years. It's only in recent years that we are now seeing convergence on several issues, on several areas, and the elevation in the cooperation. So from bilateral relationship to strategic partnership, then to comprehensive strategic partnership, and now we are going to hold institutionalized annual summits. If I could understand from you, what have been the factors that have led to this evolution in our relationship, and the main pillars that have led to this kind of upgradation that we now have between India and Australia?
The key factor was that through much of the Cold War period, we were on opposing sides of the Cold War. We had a special relationship with the Soviet Union. Australia was a key part of the American military alliance in the Indo-Pacific. And in terms of our worldview and the way we saw our different geographies, there was a clear difference of opinion. Now, after the Cold War, there was a time lag. And as Ambassador Vishnu Prakash said, that the first reaction and the most hostile reaction to India's nuclear tests came from Australia. But it's the last decade, really, where ties have flourished. And there are a large number of reasons. First of all, there's a recognition, much more than ever before, that these are two countries driven by the same values of multiculturalism, democracy, rule of law. But as you and I know, Ms. Jha, that it's not enough for just to have a convergence of values. A convergence of interests is important as well. There, Australia recognized that they had put all their eggs in the Chinese basket. China's economic growth was dependent on sourcing raw materials from Australia. So, of course, Australia's economy boomed as well. But the relationship, especially after the rise of Xi Jinping, started becoming lukewarm and has now become positively hostile. On the other hand, there was this recognition that India is emerging as a large economy. It's an open economy, unlike the autarky of the past. So there was much greater bullishness in Australia or India. This has been now reciprocated ever since Prime Minister Modi visited Australia, when Prime Minister Tony Abbott was in charge. And this has continued through Malcolm Turnbull, as well as now Scott Morrison. Of course, there are elections going to happen in Australia in a month and a half. But my expectation is that even if there's a Labour government, there is now a bipartisan consensus. What is also interesting is that in the past, if you had attacks on Indian students in Melbourne or the kind of reaction to the nuclear tests, that could derail the relationship. But on the other hand, today, clearly there are differences on Ukraine and the relationship with Russia. But that, for instance, does not even find mention in the joint statement. There's mention on Afghanistan in terms of other countries, Myanmar, but not a mention of Ukraine or differences over Ukraine. It's a strength of the bandwidth of our relationship today, I think, which speaks for itself.
Absolutely. So in the manner, Ambassador, that our relationship has matured, that such concerns where areas of divergences are not taking over areas of convergences. And in that way, if I could ask, one important aspect that both Prime Ministers in fact spoke about is, of course, the comprehensive economic partnership agreement. On the bilateral trade and investment front, we have made rapid progress, but this is one agreement that has been, long awaited. If I could understand from you, from both sides, both the Australian point of view and the Indian point of view, what are the concerns, the barriers that are delaying this particular agreement, sir?
Frankly speaking, when it comes to free trade agreements, CEPAs, CECAs, we are still in the process of finalizing our approach with very many countries. And a number of our important free trade agreements are in the process of getting finalized, whether it is an upgraded CEPA with Korea, with Japan, with Canada, with the European Union. The challenge remains that there has to be a right balance. For us, we can open the markets in certain areas, but we have also to be sensitive. We have to be careful about Indian farmers, about small-scale industries, micro-industries, mini-industries. And there has to be a balance of what we get and what we see. So that is proving to be a bit, it's work in process, if I were to say that. There is also the desire and an effort on part of certain sections of the industry to continue with the environment that is there in which they are operating. And there is then the counter of the requirement of being a part of the supply chains. So it is a tough call. Nowhere in the world are free trade agreements an easy task, but given the fact that we are at a certain level of economic development and the countries that I refer to are developed countries, so there are challenges, but there is a desire very much on the part of countries, India, Australia and other countries to come find some kind of a modus vivendi. I think that somewhere along the line, it will also have to be a political decision, because pure economic decision may or may not yield the desired results. But if we look at the big picture, I think we will have to take some political decisions. If I can just take a minute to also add about what makes the India-Australia relationship tick, I think it is now the diaspora which is playing a very important role, the student body, India's overall relationship with US, Japan, that is also coming into play. And certainly Chinese aggression is a factor which is being taken into consideration by all sides. So there are push factors and pull factors, which is propelling the relationship forward.
Absolutely. Dr. Cholia, so when we talk about shared interests, and of which both Professor Mattu and the Ambassador have spoken about, one significant takeaway from this virtual summit has been the letter of intent towards concluding migration and mobility partnership agreement. Now, if I could understand from you, how significant is it for us from the Indian point of view?
Yeah, well, Tina, Australia has been slammed by refugee rights and other human rights advocates in the past for shutting its doors to asylum seekers. But on the other hand, the Indian migration is mostly skilled workers. So we would like them to offer greater opportunities for our services and for free movement of our professionals. And I think that's one area of migration mobility relates to that. And that will, of course, also increase investments on both sides. If there is easier movement of professionals without many barriers, then it enhances two-way FDI flows as well. So definitely those things matter. A lot of our students who go there also want to convert after studying and also find jobs there in Australia. But I would also want to mention one other point, which is the regional factor here. Both Mattu Saab and Ambassador Prakash mentioned it. The statement at the end of the summit talked about, Prime Minister Modi welcomed Australia's enhanced engagement in the Indian Ocean. Now, this is, I think, very critical. And in the past, there have been people who are skeptical, saying, well, Australia is minding the Western Pacific, and then India is minding the Indian Ocean. And even though there is an Indo-Pacific, which is supposed to bring the two together, there's not much, because the Indian Navy doesn't go that far up to the Western Pacific, and the Australian Navy is not coming this far into the Indian Ocean to enable India's interests. But I think now there's a clear interoperability, the factor I was mentioning earlier. Mm-hmm. So at the strategic level, I think this is another factor that's going to play a big role going forward, because when we say Indo-Pacific, for it to fructify, for it to materialize, for it to really become a living reality, then Australia and India are the key pillars. And Japan, of course, is also there, another key partner. So the US commitments, whether the US remains fully committed or not, we have to see in the long run, but we would hope that they would, in order to contain China. But even in their absence, or if they are, they are only with a half of a mind, we still want cooperation among the middle powers in this region. So Australia, India, I think the cement that is binding them together, because the Chinese, as Matusa was mentioning, the Chinese influence operations, the kind of interference they're doing in Australia, this become a big political, it's a snowball into a big political controversy in Australia. They don't want to become a colony of China. So I think that's the kind of context in which we see that the Indo-Pacific is really becoming and that is something to. Recently, the Australian Army Chief was here, and we had lots of fruitful talks on how to increase the engagement. The navies are also meeting. So I think those will ultimately override, the smaller issues of migration and mobility. I mean, of course, they matter to people who want access, but something bigger is happening. That's why we call it a comprehensive strategic partnership.
One binding factor, and of which Ambassador also spoke about, has been the increasing role of the Indian diaspora there. So we saw in America how during the elections, the Indian Americans played a very, very significant role. Now that you mentioned Australia is going to conduct elections, I would like to understand from you, how much of an important role will the Indian diaspora be playing in the Australia elections? And also the fact that how, just after this virtual summit, the Australian Foreign Minister announced setting up of a Centre of Foreign Relations. Is that taking a step forward and in a way taking the Indian diaspora along, taking care of their interests as well, engaging with them, in a more better way, in a more enhanced way?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the diaspora is coming of age. It's still comparatively a small diaspora, not with the same kind of influence that the diaspora has in the United States or the United Kingdom, or indeed in Canada. To give you one glaring example, that there wasn't till now a single elected member or in the Parliament. There's only one senator, on the Honourable Lisa Singh, who's now the director of the Australia-India Institute. But so politically, it still is not an empowered diaspora, and yet there are constituencies where they play a role. But I think increasingly this diaspora, given its economic heft, will begin to influence policy. The second important point is that today India is the largest source of skilled migration into Australia. Now, as you pointed out, and Professor Choria said, that mobility agreements could enhance both the diaspora as well as look at the skilled migration into Australia. Australia is one of the few countries which was able to negotiate with the United States a separate deal, which was negotiated during the free trade agreement with America, but was signed separately, which allowed 10,000 visas over and above what was permitted in the H1B route, which was a more generic visa. I believe that you should actually negotiate within, when you have a comprehensive CECA, perhaps a mobility agreement where there will be a special quota for Indian skilled migrants. Now that will play into Australia's demand, also play into India's strengths, and also will help the diaspora grow into a much more influential diaspora. Remember that the Chinese diaspora is still extremely influential, and the Chinese have played every game, Sam, Dam, and Thunderbed. They have bribed people, including parliamentarians. They've used their money power. They're buying into real estate. So if you have to actually see that we need to counter China, you see, and unfortunately, we are always When we talk about China, there is always this nudge, wink, wink. The fact is, if you have to counter China and China's influence, you have to counter it at various levels. Thankfully, the Australians have now stopped the Confucius centers, which were proliferating throughout Australia, which were really instruments of the Chinese Communist Party's propaganda. Instead, this new investment in the Center for India-Australia Relations, quite apart from the Australia-India Institute, which I founded, is going to help actually translate all the vision for the two relations into reality.
Absolutely. Ambassador, so a wide range of areas in which we are seeing India-Australia relations blossoming in the last few years or so. But how do you look at the future as well? Do you think we will be able to sustain this momentum, considering the fact that when it comes to several global issues, there will always be divergences and India will always keep its interest above everyone else? And as we are witnessing in the Quad grouping, the three countries have one approach and it is very, very different from India. So the challenge will be to sustain our independent stance vis-a-vis our partners.
Absolutely right. There's a saying that you stand on an issue depending on where you sit. Geography does play a very important role. We are right here at the head of the Indian Ocean, and Australia, Japan, etc., and US to an extent, they are basically focusing more on Western Pacific. So we'll have issues where we will have divergences. Even with the best of friends, you cannot have 100% convergence. But the maturity of the relationship shows that we can, instead of talking past each other, we can sit down and elaborate on a position. We may agree to disagree, so long as the convergences outweigh the divergences, and which is quite likely, given the fact that there are now economic considerations, there are political considerations. We have spoken about various issues. And also the size of the Indian economy, the way Indian economy is growing. We are not just recipients of FDI, but we are also investing in Australia, in people-to-people relations and so on and so forth. So I'm quite optimistic that this trajectory will continue. I may add that, as Professor Mathu said, the Chinese diaspora is quite influential, and there are political leaders in Australia which are they tilt towards China. One can never forget the role that Mr. Kevin Rudd played. But I think things have come, a lot has moved since. And thanks to the Chinese interference, I guess there is a realization that relationship with countries like India are more sustainable, more equitable, and beneficial in the long run. And I think we have a similar outlook. So I'm quite optimistic that this relationship will grow.
Absolutely. Professor Cholia, concluding remark from you on how do you look at the future of India-Australia relationship? We've been able to build on several fronts a very, very strong partnership. But now, of course, going forward, the challenge will be to sustain this relationship that we have built in the last few years, considering the fact that for several decades, there were indifferences of which we spoke about with Professor Mathu earlier in the show.
Yeah, it's a transformed reality, Tina. And I look at the bilateral relationship as embedded in our broader Act East policy and our broader regional strategy for the Indo-Pacific. We are ramping up our Indo-Pacific partnerships with a renewed zeal. It's not a coincidence that there's been a summit Prime Minister Modi did with Scott Morrison, and then almost simultaneously with Fumio Kishida, the Japanese Prime Minister. So Japan and Australia both matter, and we are building closer and closer networks and making it more interoperable for all these three. And beyond, we want to expand and bring in more members into some kind of, hopefully a kind of a broader Quad Plus, informally at least. And that's the way forward to counterbalance the hegemonic threat that we face from China. So I think this is not going to go away. It's a long-term project, and Australia has committed to it, and Australia has shifted gears. Australia wants to be a bigger player in the geopolitical scenario. And of course, it wants a bigger pie in the Indian market, in the share of the Indian market. So I think if you look at all these factors, this is actually going to go only one way, which is up.
Professor Mattu, so although there are some newer areas in which we are now firming up our relationship, but are there untapped future prospects that we are yet to explore when it comes to India-Australia partnership?
I think quite clearly there are a number of areas. Critical minerals is already been identified, but the one which obviously there is sensitivity about and people don't speak about it publicly is much greater intelligence sharing. Now there are reports that India and Australia are going to collaborate much more actively in terms of surveillance and also in terms of sharing intelligence. I mean, my vision would be that the kind of system of real-time intelligence sharing that the Five Eyes have, which is United States, England, Canada, New Zealand, and Australia, could be replicated in the India-Australia relationship to begin with. But more importantly, I think relationships are finally about a vision for the future. And Australia-India relations is an idea whose time has not just come, but I believe that this will be effectively one of the strongest bilateral partnerships in this region. I cannot even imagine if there could be conditions under which this relationship could be derailed as has happened in the past.
Certainly. And with the kind of transformation we've seen, we're all positive that this relationship is only going to grow in the times to come. So that having been said, I'll have to wrap up the discussion today. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on the program today, sharing your perspective with us, taking us through how India-Australia relationship has evolved over the years and the future that we see of both countries. It was a pleasure having you on the program. So that's it from us on this edition of Perspective today. Thanks very much to all our viewers as well for their time.